warm Wednesday evening to you, our listeners, and we are streaming live from DLW Studios, and this is the Lord Christ Surge, Live the Experience. This is our Book of the Month segment, and boy oh boy, what a time we are having in the book Christ Object Lessons. One of the things that I hope that you are doing is that besides the chapters that we will be discussing, that you are actually running through the chapters of the entire book. It's a great book, just like The Great Controversy, and it's worth your time. Spend some time reading good books. Keep it beside your bed, and when you get a chance, you know, sometimes we have or sleep can break sometimes, and you know, it is as it were God waking us up to just get a little bit of him during the still of the night. You can keep that book right there, and when you get up, read a chapter or two, even before you go to work or even before you start your day. Just read a chapter of that book, Christ Object Lessons, and you can get a little bit of refreshment to carry you as you go about your daily business and chores. This week we are discussing, and we are going to go into chapter 21, which is entitled A Great Gulf Fixed. A Great Gulf Fixed. And without further ado, we want to get right into that chapter. And this can be found in the book of Luke chapter 16. And I'm reading the Tree of Life version, and I'm starting the parable. This is a wonderful parable, and incidentally, this parable is usually used by a large majority to teach a particular thing that is not even found or supported, a thing that is not consistent with sound Bible truth. That is the consciousness in death. We are going to see exactly what this parable actually teaches as we go through this parable and as we get some excerpts from the book Christ Object Lessons. The Bible tells us here, Tree of Life version, in Luke chapter 16, now there was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen, living it up in luxury every day. That's just how the parable begins. And now I'm reading from the King James Version, and we are reading from verse 20 now. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, at the rich man's gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then said he, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. End of parable. And we are going to pull some quotations now from that wonderful book, Christ Object Lessons, chapter 21, a great golf fix. From the onset, it is easy for the unlearned and careless reader to grasp from this parable that there is consciousness in death, because here we have a dissertation dealing with two men, one being rich and one being poor, as it were, and then they both died and they went to their various places. And the parable seemingly suggests, in fact, the parable says that Abraham was the father of both, and that Lazarus and that rich man, they were able to communicate with each other as though one was in heaven and the other one was in hell. Listen, the Bible is not here trying to teach that there's a consciousness in death. Remember, this is a parable, and it is designed to teach some of the Bible's most profound and solemn truth. We want to get exactly what this parable is teaching as we go along. Christ Object Lessons, page 260, paragraph 1. In the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Christ shows that in this life, men decide their eternal destiny. So this is what the parable is about. During probationary time, the grace of God is offered to every soul. But if men waste their opportunities in self-pleasing, they cut themselves off from everlasting life. No after probation will be granted them. By their own choice, they have fixed an impassable gulf between them and their God. We are continuing. This parable draws a contrast between the rich who have not made God their dependence and the poor who have made God their dependence. Christ shows that the time is coming when the position of the two classes will be reversed. Those who are poor in this world's good, yet who trust in God, are patient in suffering, will one day be exalted above those who now hold the highest positions the world can give, but who have not surrendered their life to God. Let's see where we're going with this. I'm going to give you another quotation. There were then no hospitals in that time when Christ spoke this parable, in which the sick might be cared for. The suffering and needy were brought to the notice of those whom the Lord hath entrusted with, that they might receive help and sympathy. Thus is what it was with the beggar and the rich man. Lazarus was in great need of help, for he was without friends, home, money, and food. Remember, there were no hospitals. Yet he was allowed to remain in this condition day after day, while the wealthy nobleman had every want supplied. The one who was abundantly able to relieve the sufferings of his fellow creature lived to himself as many live today. So the poor in our land is actually there to help those who are rich, and the rich in turn would help those who are poor. We are heading somewhere with this important object lesson. Keep in mind that this is an object lesson. Christ was teaching a very important truth here. How to care for the needy, how to care for the suffering, how to take care of the homeless. God was actually showing, Christ was showing in this parable that those who are entrusted with the wealth of the earth ought to relieve the sufferings and need of those who are less fortunate. Mind you, you will notice that Christ required a strict account of those who have now passed off the scene, who passed off being wealthy men. He takes account of what they have done with their earthly treasure. There are today, close beside us, many who are hungry, naked, and homeless. We see them every day. Hungry, naked, and homeless. And neglect to impart of our means to these needy, suffering ones places upon us a burden of guilt, which we shall one day fear to meet. All covetousness is condemned as idolatry. All selfish indulgence is an offense in God's sight. God had made the rich man, we are told, a steward of his means, and it was his duty to attend to just such cases as to that of the beggar. The command had been given, and listen to the commandments of God. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Do you think that the rich man really loved Lazarus as he loved his own self? Remember the way in which his parable began? This rich man had every want supplied. He was dressed in linen and purple and lived in luxury every day. And just the crumbs that will fall from his table, Lazarus would eat. This poor fellow ate from the crumbs, while this rich man lived lavishly in ostentation and show. There was a time when the position of these two men drastically was reversed. The time came when a change took place in the condition of the two men. The poor man had suffered day by day, but he had patiently and quietly endured. In the course of time, he died and was buried. There was no one to mourn for him. But by his patience in suffering, he had witnessed for Christ. He had endured the test of his faith. And at his death, he is represented as being carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died, according to the parable, and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am in torments in this flame. Christ desires his hearers to understand that it is impossible for men to secure the salvation of the soul after death. After death, it was impossible. This parable is designed to show us that depending on how we live and use our treasure, it shows us where we will spend eternity. No time was granted after for this rich man to correct his mistakes. No time. Hence, there was a great gulf fixed. Let's continue this quotation. Son, Abraham is represented as answering, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which pass from hence to you cannot, and neither they pass to us that come from thence. Thus Christ represented the hopelessness of looking for a second probation. No second probation. This life is the only time given to man in which to prepare for eternity. Yes, my dear friends, this time. So when the rich man solicited additional evidence for his brothers. Remember, the parable says, okay, since there's a great gulf fixed between us, I have 5 brethren. Send someone from the dead to go and warn them so that they would live their life better, so that they would not come where I am. He solicited greater or additional evidence for his brother's sake. And he was plainly told that should this evidence be given, should one come from the dead, they would not be persuaded. His request cast a reflection on God. It was as if the rich man had said, if you had more thoroughly warned me, I should not now be here. Abraham, Father Abraham, in his answer to this request, is representing as saying, your brothers have been sufficiently warned. Light has been given them, but they would not see. Truth has been presented to them, but they would not hear. In other words, even if one comes from the dead, they will not be persuaded. Mind you, let me tell you this right away. It is impossible for the dead to communicate with the living. That is one thing that this parable teaches. Impossible. For that request was not granted. Impossible. Furthermore, listen to the underlying truth brought out in this particular parable. Listen to the message that Christ wanted it to send home to his hearers. I quote John chapter 12 from verse 9. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. Remember that account in John chapter 11, the chapter before? Christ raised Lazarus from the dead. And so, there was a time when Mary came to where Jesus was, and she anointed his feet with oil. And the Jews came to that gathering, not only to see Jesus, but to see Lazarus, because Lazarus, being resurrected, was there present at that gathering. Listen to their intentions. The Bible tells us this in verse 12 of chapter 12. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Remember, Lazarus was dead 4 days. Christ came to Bethany after Lazarus was 4 days dead, which the Bible says by this time he stinketh. And Lazarus was resurrected, and he was invited along with the Master, along with the Messiah, to this gathering. And the Jews knew that Christ resurrected Lazarus, and they wanted to kill him the second time. What is the lesson here? You see, Christ in this parable said to them, not even if one came from the dead, they wouldn't believe. Not even if one came from the dead. Here it is, in Christ's object lesson, we have the truth being brought out. The law and the prophets are God's appointed agencies for the salvation of men. Christ said, let them give heed to these evidences. If they do not listen to the voice of God in his word, the testimony of a witness raised from the dead would not be heeded. Imagine, Christ went about preaching that he is the resurrection and the life. The Jews did not believe. They did not believe. He proved this to them by the resurrection of Lazarus, the last great miracle he wrought in that Jewish economy. And they did not believe. They had Lazarus visible and present at that gathering, knew that he was 4 days dead and was resurrected, proved, and he was eating and drinking also in that gathering. And spirits cannot eat, spirits cannot drink. So they knew that Lazarus had been resurrected. And not even that great miracle was sufficient evidence for them, to their wicked conscience, to prove to them that Christ was indeed the Messiah. In this life, friends, again, Christ is saying, not even if one came back from the dead would some people believe. Not even if one came back from the dead. We quote again. The conversation between Abraham and the once rich man is figurative. The lesson to be gathered from it is that every man is given sufficient light for the discharge of the duties required of him. Man's responsibilities are proportionate to his opportunities and privileges. God gives to everyone sufficient light and grace to do the work he has given to him to do. If man fails to do that which a little light shows to be his duty, greater light would only reveal unfaithfulness, neglect to improve the blessings given. And lastly, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, shows how the two classes represented by these men are estimated in the unseen world. There is no sin in being rich. No sin at all in being rich, my friends, if riches are not inquired by injustice. A rich man is not condemned for having riches, but condemnation rests upon him if the means entrusted to him is spent in selfishness. Far better might he lay up his money beside the throne of God by using it to do good. Death cannot make any man poor who thus devotes himself to seeking eternal riches. Death can't make you poor at all. But the man who hoards his treasure for self cannot take any of it to heaven. He has proved himself to be an unfaithful steward. During his lifetime, he had his good things, but he was forgetful of his obligation to God. He failed of securing the heavenly treasure. Today, there's a class in our world who are self-righteous. They are not gluttons, they are not drunkards, they are not infidels, but they desire to live for themselves, not for God. He is not there in their thoughts. Therefore, they are classed with the unbelievers. So friends, here we have a parable with this rich man who claimed to be the son of Abraham, and indeed, he was the son of Abraham. But in that was no virtue for him to gain access to heaven. God takes account of not where we came from, but what we do with what he has entrusted to us. Therefore, in this Book of the Month segment, with whatsoever has been entrusted to you, use it not only for the glory of God, but for the good of your fellow men. Whatsoever riches you may have, be it monetary riches, be it knowledge, be it in whatsoever resource, do not forget the poor among you. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Far from teaching a truth that there is consciousness in death and eternal torment in hell, this parable teaches a greater lesson that appeals more to the heart of those living today. The truth of consciousness in death does no good for us at all. But the truth of this parable as it relates to the rich man and what he did in his lifetime, and the poor man and how he lived, and the lessons to be gleaned from that parable is of an eternal consequence. Friends and brethren, listeners, those who are listening for the first time, may heaven help us while we have this time on earth, while this probationary time is granted to us. Remember, we will not get a second probation, and no one who died before will come back and warn us, as the parable says, whatsoever our hands find to do, let us do it with all our might, for there is no wisdom or anything in the grave whithersoever thou goest. God bless you. This has been a production coming right from DLW Studios. Lord Christ Surge, live the experience. I'm Elder Kern Charles, and it has been a pleasure sharing this Book of this Month segment with you. Be tuned in to our regular broadcast or Flashpoints on Tuesday, and oh boy, our family segments every Friday evening, and God knows when we will stop this segment. Until you say you have had enough, then we will stop. May God bless you. Have a happy day, and may God watch between us while we are separated one from the other. Goodbye.